Welcome to the Waseca Small Town Big Stories podcast, brought to you by our sponsors, Bird's Eye Foods and Itron. I'm your host, Ann Fitch, the Executive Director of the Waseca Area Chamber of Commerce, where we promote business and enhance community. Today, I'm joined at the Suburban Furniture Table by Mike McQuery, the owner of Half Pint Brewing Company. Welcome, Mike.
Hello.
Great to have you here.
Thanks.
So we're right now we're kind of in the colder season, so the hops are not growing.
Correct. They are all cut down and put away for the winter.
So when you say cut down and put away for the winter, what does that mean?
Well, after we harvest in the fall, once they get hard and brittle, because we want the plant to be able to take whatever nutrients are left in that plant after we cut down the hops, it'll pull it back down into the root system. And so when they get all dry and brittle, I go out there and I cut everything flush with the ground. So right now, when you come out to the brewery, of course, there's no snow on the ground, so you can see everything, but there's nothing in the hop field. It's just the poles and wires stay up all year, but the hops get cut down, and they're perennials, so in the spring, they'll just start growing new shoots, which are the new shoots that we string for the hops.
Ah, okay. So you have to be a gardener in addition to a beer maker.
Yes, but the beer maker always takes precedence over the hops.
Yes.
The last few years, the hops, whatever we string and we kind of get, because the hops are more of an education thing for us. Mm-hmm. I grew up in Oregon, and Oregon, Washington, and Idaho grow 95% of the U.S. hop crop in those three states. So hops don't grow great here in Minnesota. There's a lot of little hop yards, but there's no commercial hop yards here in Minnesota. But growing up in Oregon, when you drive out in the country, it's not corn and soy fields everywhere. There's acres and acres of hop yards. So growing up, I knew how hops grew, right?
Sure.
I didn't know what they were for when I was a kid. I knew they were for beer.
Yeah.
I didn't know much about them, but you just grow up seeing hop yards everywhere. So for us, I think the hops have become more of an education thing, more so than growing them to save money for buying hops in the brewery.
Got it.
We grow 3 varieties of hops. I started with 5. A couple of them don't do very well here, so I ended up killing those. So it's not as much about growing the hops for our beer. Mm-hmm. More of an education. These are how hops grow, because they just don't grow great here in Minnesota.
Yeah, it's just we don't have the climate for it. Do we have the right dirt for it?
So the soil's great, but in our soil here we have Downey Mildew. And Downey Mildew affects most hops. And I learned this all from a guy that I met here in town named Charlie Rower, who works for the University of Minnesota, and he had been studying growing hops here in Minnesota for, 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
And I think he's kind of gone away from that, because he's figured out that hops are not a crop that can be commercially grown here in Minnesota. So you might see some little hop yards here and there where somebody's growing some hops that they're going to sell to a local brewery, and that's kind of what we're doing. All the hops we do grow at Half Pint do use in the beers.
Got it.
But it's probably gone down to 5 to 10% of the total hops that we use. So it's more of an education thing.
Yeah.
People get interested. What are you growing out there? I had no idea they grew 18 feet tall.
Right.
How did they grow? So when we're open during the summer and somebody asks me about them, I always say, grab your beer, let's go. And I take them out and kind of talk about hops and how they grow. And I've always been, let people know that it's not commercially viable to grow hops here. It's just not the right soil. So that when we talked about the soil, Downey Mildew grows it's in the soil. Mm-hmm. So as they're coming up, every hop yard in Minnesota will get it. You can combat that with spraying, but I'm one guy making all the beer and doing everything.
Yeah.
So that's why the hops, once I get them strung, I kind of let them do what they do until it's time to harvest, and just let them go do their thing, because I don't have time to spray every time it's super humid or we get rain, or because the moisture is the problem with Downey Mildew. So you have to spray all the time, and I just don't have that time. So.
Does the spraying affect the end product at all, Mike?
No, it doesn't. It's just to combat the Downey Mildew.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Because you're kind of a one-man show. I know you have employees and you have people who help you out, but I mean spraying would be a big undertaking to take on everything else that you do as well. And so having those hops is not only aesthetically pleasing for your farm brewery,
Yep.
great for Instagram photos for people
Yep.
to come out there. You have the hop picking event
Yep.
every year. So I think it's cool that you have the hops on the brewery premise.
And as far as I know, we're the only brewery in Minnesota that's doing that. I believe we're still the only ones that are a working tap room on a farm. I know there's another brewery that's on a farm, but they just wholesale everything. They don't have a tap room that you can go out and visit. So I think the hops and doing it on the farm is something when we moved here that we wanted to do to be different than every other brewery, because every other brewery's in a town somewhere. So
Yeah, you are a very, very unique brewery.
yeah,
not only
and I
to
could see
Minnesota.
I could see some other breweries starting. I've been contacted with somebody else that's interested in doing it. So I'm unique for now, but
Yes.
I could see other people wanting to do it. We're like a winery, right? And I think that's where we're a little bit different. We're out on a farm. People are used to going to wineries because they have to grow their own grapes, and they're out in the country. But we're the only brewery that I know of in Minnesota that's out in the country.
Now, can you talk about your journey to Minnesota? You said you grew up on the West Coast there.
Yep.
So talk about how you guys got here.
Well, it was all my wife's idea. So
That's how it always begins.
my wife's cousin and her grew up very close.
Sure.
They lived out in Portland. She married a guy from Morristown. They had lived in Portland. He was in the military. Tay got pregnant. We were within 5 blocks of her when she had Josiah. We're Josiah's godparents, but then they decided that they were going to move to Minnesota. So they bought a piece of property just up the road from the pizza farm.
Okay.
And they moved back here, but Amy and I loved coming to visit them. And on one of our trips, Amy decided that she was going to apply for a job out here. And I thought she was crazy, because she wasn't real happy at her job. And this was vacation, but she was going to a job interview. And she went to the job. I said, that's fine. It's good experience to go through for, interview stuff, but we're not moving to Minnesota. That just doesn't make any sense.
So you're on vacation, but yet she's going to a job interview. It's not.
Yep.
I mean, it's not my top priority on vacation, but go
Me
Amy.
neither.
Go Amy.
So she went to the job interview. That night, I actually went out to the boathouse with Chris, and that's where I met Charlie. And Charlie Rower is the one that works at University of Minnesota, and he said, one of my friends from college started a farm brewery back in Oregon. And I said, I love this concept. I had brought some of my beer. Charlie loved it. He's like, you could totally grow hops here in Minnesota. We don't have hardly any breweries. Because I think at that time when we were talking about moving here, there might have been 70 breweries. And now there's just a ton, right?
Yeah.
So many have opened in the last 10 years. And he's like, you could totally do a farm brewery. There's none anywhere near here. And Amy ended up getting offered the job. And she said, if you want to start your farm brewery, I'll support us if you want to move to Minnesota. And I thought, you were crazy. But if I don't take this opportunity, I might never get that chance, right? I'm growing, I was a home brewer, like a lot of brewers are now. I was home brewing in Oregon just because I loved brewing, and it was more of a hobby. And I entered a few beers in some beer competitions, homebrew competitions, and won some of those. My friends loved my beer and were like, why don't you start a brewery?
Yeah.
Well, at that time in Portland, there was more breweries per capita than any city in the world. And I'm like, to compete in this market, you're going to have millions of dollars to build a brewery. It just didn't make sense. But then when Amy got offered the job out here, I had to take that opportunity. So Amy and I decided that she was going to take the job, and land prices were cheaper out here than in Oregon, so it was easier to find land. There was just a ton of things that made sense. We loved Waseca. We loved Chris and Taya's group of friends, which we didn't have in Portland, just because Portland's so big, you don't know your neighbors. I mean,
Sure.
And we kind of fell in love with Waseca and looked at the schools and how good they were and class sizes. And our kids were 3 and 5 at that time. So if we were going to do something like this, that was the time for us to do it. So we picked up and moved to Waseca.
You had a lot of things working in your favor, and certainly, your wife's craziness.
Yep.
But also her willingness to invest in your dream and support you.
She's pretty cool.
Yeah, no kidding.
To take what I did as a hobby and turn it into a job, right?
Yeah.
I get to make beer whenever I want, right?
Talk about turning your hobby into a job, because there's sometimes people talk about, well, I don't want to turn my hobby into a job because I don't want to have to do my hobby. How does that feel to have turned your hobby into your career?
So Amy asked me this question last night. Do you still like making beer?
Yeah.
And I do. I mean, because I brewed beer yesterday, and cleaning sucks, right? But
yeah.
And cleaning's probably the most important part to making good beer, is that your equipment needs to be clean, no bacteria, stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's where you get off flavors in beer. And right away I said yes. I love that I get to walk across my yard and go to work and make beer for the day, right?
Yeah.
So for me, is it work? I mean, yes. But it's fun work. There are certain beers that I have that I don't drink, like Warren's Wisdom.
Yeah, you don't drink Warren's Wisdom, huh?
I don't. I've never been an amber fan, and I wasn't even going to make an amber until my parents followed us out here, right?
Sure.
So my whole family ended up moving to Waseca. My brother first ended up moving here with his kids. And when they decided they were going to move to Waseca, he had to go to my parents and say, hey, we're going to move to Minnesota with Mike. And so my brother and I are the only siblings. So they said, well, if our kids and grandkids are moving to Minnesota, I guess we are too. So my brother works at the brewery. My dad works at the brewery.
Oh, yeah.
And so Dad bugged me all the time and would bring it up to customers that, he's not going to make an amber. I love ambers, and I wish he'd make one. So I surprised him and made an amber. And I didn't have a name for it. I put it up there. It was the second bestseller that weekend. And Dad said, see, I told you, if you made an amber, people would drink it. And so I named it Warren's Wisdom after my dad.
That's great.
So certain beers for me become a chore, which Warren's is one, because it's not a beer I'm going to drink.
Yeah.
Hannah's Honey is a good beer. It's our best-selling beer. We use local honey from Hannah's Honey. But that one's a chore. So
is it labor intensive?
It is. It's a long time, right? So I start brewing at 8 o'clock, and I'm usually done at 2 or 3 in the afternoon.
Okay.
But then that night, so Amy gets up early, I stay up late.
Okay.
So when she goes to bed, then I go to the brewery and finish cleaning. So brew days are long days for me because I brew and then clean that night. So it's labor intensive. A lot of it's hurry up and wait. Like you do one thing, you set a timer, and wait until you do the next thing. So
how much is in one loaf? If you're going to brew a batch of Hannah's Honey, how many gallons of beer is in that batch? So
I'm on a 3-barrel system, which is 93 gallons.
Okay.
So we get 6 big-sized kegs out of each batch. Hannah's Honey is so popular that I do a double batch for that one.
Okay.
So I do have 2 7-barrel stainless steel tanks, so I can brew a batch, put the wort in there, turn around, brew another batch right after it, put that wort in there, and then add the yeast to get it to ferment. And so I'm making a 6-barrel batch of Hannah's Honey. Because it sells so well, it just makes sense to spend one day brewing it and only cleaning once instead of doing 2 3-barrel batches and having to clean twice. So.
And how much honey is in one batch?
So one batch is 30 pounds of honey.
That's a lot of honey.
Yep. So thank goodness we have Hannah's Honey, because Paul and Jane take care of us whenever I need honey. They will, and they come into the brewery and drink beer all the time.
Yes.
And so whenever I send them a text that, hey, I need to brew a Hannah's, Paul will walk across the parking lot with 2 big buckets of honey that he brings in. And it's all locally sourced honey.
Yeah.
And when I say local, the pizza farm has his bee boxes there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it doesn't get any more local than the honey that we're getting from Paul. So, and we're supporting his business, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, Paul's got little apiaries all over the county. It's so cool.
Yeah.
It's so
cool. It's a
cool.
great partnership for us and them. And we started selling Hannah's Honey about a month ago up at the brewery, and Paul's coming in once a month and or not once a month, almost once a week lately, and restocking his honey on our shelves. So you can get Hannah's honey out at the brewery. So.
It's such good honey.
It is.
It's such good honey.
Yeah.
I love it. Can you talk about the process of brewing? Just the step by step. I mean, step one, I don't even know if step one, putting the water in, Mike. I don't know. I've never watched you do it.
Step one is milling the grains and heating up water.
Well, are you doing that?
Yep.
You're milling the grains?
Yep. So I built a grain mill. Probably once a month, I go up to the cities to BSG, which is Brewer Supply Group, which is in Shakopee, which is nice for me. It saves me on shipping. I put in my order and I go up and I pick up the bags of grain and I bring them back in my pickup truck and put them in the brewery until I'm ready to brew that batch. But brewing a batch of beer is milling the grains, so running them through the grain mill. So we're not chewing them up, we're crushing them because we want that hull of the outside to work as a filter. When we're taking the wort, which is the sugary liquid that comes out, so we put the grains, and I'm doing it the way that I learned from my buddy in Oregon. I have an old dairy tank for my mash tun. So the mash tun's where the grains and the water sit for a specific period of time at a specific temperature. And what we're doing is we're extracting the proteins and sugars and enzymes that we need to make beer. So we heat the water up, we add it to those grains, and we'll let it sit. Usually it's an hour. At a specific temperature. So different temperatures that you're mashing at do different things in beer. Mm-hmm. But we let it sit there for an hour, and then when we're done with that, I'm heating up more water, and it's a process called sparging, where we're sprinkling water over the top of those grains to stop that conversion of sugars. And then we're taking that liquid, which is the wort, and we're putting it in the boil kettle. And then in the boil kettle, we get it up to boiling. And that's where the hops get added. Mm-hmm. So different beers are going to have different amounts, different styles, different kinds of hops that we're going to put in the beer. And you kind of have a hopping schedule. So bittering hops are the hops that go in first. So if we're making like a West Coast IPA that's going to be more bitter, you're using more high alpha hops, and alphas are... the bitterness in a hop. So if it's going to be really bitter, you're going to put a lot more of those high alpha hops in at the beginning of the boil. And then those hops that you add later in the boil are going to be for flavor and aroma. So, there might be 2 or 3 hop additions. Some of them might have 5 or 6 hop additions. Huh. So once it's up to boiling, you add those hops in there. You add the rest of the hops according to your schedule. And then usually we boil for about an hour. Sometimes it's longer depending on the beer. And then we cool that beer down to 68 degrees for most, which are ales. And then we put them in the fermentation room, which is a room that's temperature controlled. So I set up my brewery just like home brewing, only on a much bigger scale.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was cost, right? Stainless steel tanks are super expensive.
Right.
So I tried to do it within the budget that we had. And it goes into that. So I made a room that controls the temperature. You can get tanks that have glycol. So it's a liquid that can be changed the temperature. And they'll go in a lot of tanks that are temperature controlled. So each tank's temperature controlled. For me, I just use a room because most of mine are ales, which are going to be in that 68 to 72 is where they're going to ferment. So once we cool it down to that 68 degrees and move it into the fermentation room in a tank, that's where we add the yeast. And then the yeast does its job. It eats the sugars and creates alcohol. And once most of those sugars have been eaten and converted to alcohol, then we transfer them into the cooler. It'll go into the cooler, which will stop the yeast from doing anything else because it's too cold. So yeast needs that warmer temperature to do what it's doing. And we put it in that cooler, and it'll sit for a week to 2 weeks. Some of our beers, like strawberry cream, I'm on a small enough scale that I've always been able to use real fruit.
Yeah. Which is so cool.
I have run into problems. So we grow raspberries out there, and I've done some raspberry beers that have turned out great, but you can't guarantee there's no bacteria fresh fruit that
Yes.
you're using. So
Yes.
I have kind of switched and gone to fruit puree. Just because it's aseptic. I know there's no bacteria. I don't want to waste a whole batch of beer because I used real raspberries and some bacteria got in there
Yeah.
and changed the flavor. But we will always use real fruit, real coffee, real vanilla. I've never used any extracts or flavorings in my beer. It's always got to be the real fruit. So if we do a fruit beer, then we'll put that fruit puree in and let it sit on that fruit for a couple weeks to pull that strawberry flavor or peach or whatever fruit we're using. And then it goes into a bright tank where we force carbonate it, and then it goes into the kegs, and then it's ready to be served.
And from start to finish, how long's the process?
Depending on the beer, 3 weeks to 3 months.
Oh my gosh.
And I say 3 months because during COVID, when I had more time to do stuff, I did build a lagering room. So I can do lagers. Lagers ferment at a lower temperature. So because that yeast doesn't move as fast, it takes a lager longer to finish its fermentation process. And then the act of lagering is putting it in a cold temperature. That also helps clear up the beer. So by moving it into the cooler, any of the proteins or stuff that's in the beer, and maybe it would be a little cloudy, those cold temperatures make them heavy and drop to the bottom, and then we take the beer off the top. So I did end up getting a filter. There's certain beers that I filter, but most of our beers are unfiltered, and that lagering process and the cold temperature clears the beer up for us. So
Interesting. And is there a point during the process where this batch didn't work out? Or it's not going to?
No, that's...
Or you have to wait till the end?
It's usually after the fermentation process where I would know, because then I try it, right? I can taste it. Because to know the final taste of the beer, the yeast has to do its thing, because yeast also adds flavors to that beer depending on what kind of yeast you're using. So it would usually be after fermentation I could tell if something went wrong with that beer. And I have had batches that I've had to dump.
Sure.
Just from different things, using fresh fruit that probably had some bacteria on it that changed the flavor to where I didn't like it. There have been times where a batch just didn't turn out and it ends up going down the drain.
Yeah.
I always thought that starting the brewery, because when I was homebrewing, I was doing 10-gallon batches. And I had hundreds of recipes. I still have them all printed out on paper. I always thought, I'll go back and, if I want to do a test batch, I'll pull out my homebrew stuff and test a batch. Well, doing the homebrew batch takes as long as doing a full batch. So I kind of figured out that one guy doing everything doesn't have a lot of time. So I just end up risking it on the 3-barrel system. And if something goes wrong, then that one goes down the drain. But that hasn't happened too often that we've had beers that I've dumped. So
when you are making a batch, maybe it's something new, do you have kind of an idea of how you envision it to taste when you're trying a new recipe? Like, I think it's supposed to taste like this, and then at the end, man, this doesn't taste like how I thought it was going to, or it tastes better, or just different. As a brewer, like, how do you know? Like, as a chef, I know what salt, pepper, garlic, paprika tastes like, so I kind of know what my flavor profile is going to be. But as a brewer, how do you do that? Well,
and it's the same thing, right? Because you're dealing with all these different grains that we use, so you know what those grains do to your beer. Same with the hops and the yeast, right? Now, if I'm trying some new style that I've never done before, it's kind of crapshoot, right?
Sure.
I mean, you can research, look on the internet what this style of beer uses for grains and stuff like that, and then come up with your own recipe to make.
Okay.
But new beers are always, it's an experiment, right?
Yeah.
Not knowing. And until we've done them and they sell well at the brewery, or, I get feedback from customers, you got to make this one all the time, right? And so when we opened, we started with 8 beers, and a lot of those beers we started with are still on tap. Paz Porter, Hannah's Honey, now Warren's Wisdom is kind of a staple that we have on, and a lot of the other beers end up either being seasonal or just whenever I feel like brewing that beer, I'll put it back on tap. So certain beers right now, we still have Hannah's Honey with habanero.
Oh yeah,
which is real habaneros that my brother grows in his garden. we only do that once a year, right?
Yeah.
Because I want those fresh habaneros. So certain beers, our Oktoberfest is once a year around Oktoberfest. During winter, Angry Snowman's my winter ale, which is kind of an English malty winter style ale. That'll be on during the winter, but I won't have it on tap the rest of the year. So I think some of that creates people looking forward to those beers, that like those beers, like Hannah's with Habanero or whatever that beer is. People will start asking when we get to fall, when's Hannah's with Habanero coming back, right?
That's awesome.
And then when we put it on tap, then they come out to get that beer that they're looking for. So
when you create a beer or a recipe and you think it's just stellar, you're like, hell yes, this is gonna be bomb. And then your customers don't respond to it how you want them to. Are you a little dejected, or
No.
or just like, okay, I'll try again, or I'm happy that they like what I have?
So everybody has different tastes.
Yeah.
And I've always known that, but starting my business where people's tastes dictate what they're going to buy changes what we brew and what we do at the brewery, right? Because now it's a business and we need to profit from that.
Yes.
So there are certain styles that I might really like, but other people might not like that style.
Yeah.
Right? So we do one. It's maybe one of my favorite beers, which is our Burnt Prairie Black IPA. So it's dark and roasty like a porter, but it's hopped like an IPA. That's one of my favorite styles of beer. It doesn't sell real great for us. We get a lot of those customers that do like that beer specifically and will come to the brewery the whole time it's on tap because they want that one beer. But there are beer styles that not everybody likes, and maybe I like it, but it doesn't sell as well. So that's why Hannah's Honey and Warren's Wisdom, which Hannah's is our bestseller and Warren's might be our second bestseller.
Always on tap.
I try to have those on tap all the time because they make the business money.
And if you have someone come in, because like you said, everyone's beer tastes are so different. And I do think you have a great variety, especially with the sours, because those are really for people who don't drink beer, honestly.
Correct.
If people are not big beer drinkers, the sours are where it's at. If someone comes in and they got a Busch Light drinker, or Coors Light drinker in their group, and they're like, I don't do craft beers, I don't do IPAs, what are you going to suggest for them?
Hannah's Honey every time.
Yeah.
And that's the one that they will go to, right? And I do some lagers, so I'll have like a Czech Pilsner on in the spring, or I'll have our Helles lager on during the summer. Those are light beer styles, so it's easy for those Bud Light, Busch Light people to go to those beers. But because we have Hannah's on almost all the time, and we're very willing to give samples out at the brewery, right? If you don't know,
yes.
that I see more breweries letting you sample, but a lot of times breweries will say, we don't do samples, you can get a flight, right? So you can try those 4 beers. I've always been of the mindset that when you come in and maybe you're not a brewery person or you don't know, I'll let you try almost all of them, just a little sample, so you can I want you to find that beer that you like, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why we always try to have a good variety of beers on, like you were talking about, the sours, right? I find that wine drinkers like sours more because they don't taste like beer.
Yeah.
We started doing hard seltzers because not everybody likes beer or wine. And I don't have a hard seltzer on right now. It's not one of my priorities, but I try to have a hard seltzer on quite often. So we usually have some kind of dark beer, which will be on nitro. We've got a sour. I always have to have a hazy IPA on, mostly because that's my favorite style. And that's what I want is a hazy IPA.
The brewer has to enjoy what's on tap.
Yeah, so I try to keep a good variety of different styles of beer on. So hopefully when you come out, if you're that Bud Light, Busch Light drinker, you can find what you like, but we will always let you try them.
Absolutely. And your root beer is very good, too.
And we do the root beer.
Yes. It's very, very good. Talk about the partnership that you have forged with your neighbors down the road at the Pizza Farm, Pleasant Grove Pizza Farm, because beer and pizza, it's an iconic combination in America anyways. And they opened up before you. Yep. And about 5 years before you did, I would say. And the videos you and Emily make are fantastic, and I think it's so fun to watch your businesses grow together independently, but also together. Yep. Because it is it's a great partnership, but it's also 2 independent businesses. Talk about how that works.
So when we first moved to Waseca, we ended up living with Chris and Tay in their basement for 9 months while we were trying to find a place to live. And they knew Bill. And so I had met Bill at one point. He came over. I told him, what my plan was, that kind of stuff. And at one point, we even talked about, he said, I have this barn, and I'm not using it. I mean, if you guys can't find a place, this was just a side conversation about maybe trying to start the brewery in his barn.
Yeah.
This was before they had decided to do the pizza farm and stuff. And I wanted my own place, right? We needed to find a house. We needed to build the brewery ourselves. But that's kind of where it started. And then I became good friends with Bill, and Bill met Emily, and they decided they were going to do the pizza farm. So then that conversation of beer and pizza, right? When you guys get open, maybe I can sell beer over here, and you guys can sell pizzas at my place. And we learned very quickly that Minnesota liquor laws don't allow me to sell beer over there.
Right.
But it worked out for the delivery, right? And I never wanted to do food. Beer brewing was my thing. I didn't want a restaurant. I didn't want a brew pub.
Yeah.
So that partnership between us is just so good. I mean, and the last 2 winters, so last year and then this winter, Emily decided that she was going to deliver every weekend that we're open, which it helps both of us, right?
Yes.
We have those beer drinkers that come out in the evening and just want to have a few beers and hang out with their friends. But then we have those people that come out for dinner, so we can offer both things, right? I mean, and we get a lot of families that, even during the winter, there's a lot of people that would go to the pizza farm and maybe not come to the brewery, but since they're not open, they decide to come out and have root beers. Mom and dad have a couple of beers, and they eat the pizza at the brewery. So it's just a great partnership. They make such good pizza.
Yes.
We don't have to do food, and it just works out great for both of us.
It drives great winter business for both
of you.
It does.
Yep. And then during the summer, this last year, we got our wholesale license. That was our way of not being able to serve beer over there, but Emily could then sell our beer over at the pizza farm. So
that's fantastic.
So we have a great partnership that during the summer, they've got our beer there, and we've got their pizza at our place all year round. So.
Oh, just fantastic. Waseca County is so fortunate to have your 2 businesses so close together. And just what a gem for Waseca County.
Well, and it works for both of us.
Yes.
I mean, and thank goodness we get along with Bill and Emily really well. So.
Yeah, what a treat that is.
Even though she makes me film the videos. But I have gotten on board with filming the videos just because it's kind of our way of letting people know what's on tap this week, what's going on.
Absolutely.
In the beginning, I was just annoyed with having to film them.
Oh, you were, Mike? Yeah. It certainly wasn't coming through at all in the videos. Not at all.
Well, I always feel like I've got so much going on that, do I have time to do this? But we found that we can make time to film our video just so people know what's going on.
Yes.
And I'm pleasantly surprised with the response that we get from customers that, say stuff like, we hadn't planned on coming out, but I saw your video this week. Yes. And with her beer or her pizza and your beer that's on this week, we decided to come out. So I will give it to Emily that she's the master of social media. I'm not so much, but
you're doing great, Mike.
Us doing the videos works very well together.
Yes, the videos are fantastic.
And we've got cats running around. And, of course, Emily, and I say it all the time in the videos, that we are not professionals, right?
I know, and I think that's the best part.
We just set up a phone and start recording, and the cat might knock over the camera, and we just set it back up and keep going. So
yeah, I think it's great.
And I think that's what people like, right? Mm-hmm. And I have had some comments that we need a weekly video or a daily video, and I'm like, nope.
No,
you're
Mike,
lucky you get 10 minutes a week out of me to do one of these videos.
Mike couldn't handle daily.
No. Yeah. So I thank Emily for talking me into doing these videos because I just think they're great now.
That's awesome. Because I feel like you've been doing them for, gosh.
Since this summer,
yeah, at least since this summer
thing. And even when we were gone,
Emily
was on vacation. So
you and your wife did one on vacation.
Bill and Emily did one from Wisconsin, and then the next week we were in Oregon. So my wife and I did our video from the coast, and so changing it up a little bit, doing something different for the video, so they're not just us standing there talking the whole time, or Emily talking the whole time.
Yeah. I think it's great. You said you get your wholesaler's license. Talk about that.
So we did that this summer so we could sell to the pizza farm was my main thing with that. And we are currently working on beer labels so we can get into some stores, right? So we're a small brewery.
Yeah.
Right? I'm on a 3-barrel system, which is still considered a nano brewery. So we're small.
Wow.
But we're slowly going to take those steps to getting into some beer stores. So we're working on labels right now. We get the labels done because we want each can to be different and have its own label. You know, when you come out to the brewery and you pick up beer to go, we just have a generic one that we put the beer sticker on. That works for selling out of the tap room, but if we're going to sell in stores and stuff, we want each beer to have its own label. So we're currently working on getting the labels. And we'll just start with a couple liquor stores for now, and see where it goes. On my 3-barrel system, I don't know, and being one guy, I don't know how long I can keep up with it. So we're just going to start small and see how it goes.
Yep.
And if it takes off, then maybe that's when we look at upgrading our system or canning line or something like that. So
sell single cans or 4-packs or...
Yeah, so we put a cooler in the brewery, so it's right by the door. And we've had it in there for a couple months now, and we also switched to the 16-ounce can size.
Okay.
I just feel like that's a better size for people. You know, when we first opened, we were just growlers.
Yes.
Which is 4 to 5 beers in that container, right? And you're filling it off the tap. It might last a couple weeks, carbonation-wise, before it starts going flat. So that single guy that comes in that wants a beer to go, he's got to take 4 beers home and hopefully drink it in a couple days or it might be flat. So then we switched to crowlers during COVID, you know, and that was a better size, right? Because now it's 2 beers in a can. But switching to the 16-ounce size, it's 1 beer. So if you buy a 4-pack, you can take it. We fill our beers just like a canning line. It'll last months in the can.
Yeah.
You could buy a 4-pack out at the brewery and take it home, and now you can have that 1 beer, and the other 3 can sit in your fridge for a week, and then you can have another beer next week. So we have just gone to growlers and 16-ounce cans, and since we put that cooler in where people can visually see the beers that we have, I bet we've quadrupled our to-go sales.
Interesting.
It's crazy. Every week we are just canning beer because we need to. Now it is the holidays, right? So Thanksgiving was here. I'm sure people came out and got more, but even just during the week, we're selling way more beers to go. So a lot of people will have a hot passport, which we're in, which you can get the hot passport. You know, you go to all these breweries and get stamps. And it helped us by putting us in that hot passport because we've never done any advertising. It's all social media and word of mouth. But now people travel around to go to all these breweries. So being in that hot passport, most people will be traveling to multiple breweries on a Saturday, right? They're going to go to us, and they're going to go to Wardhouse, and they're going to go to Owatonna and hit the 2 breweries over there. But what I'm finding now is they'll have a couple beers at our place, and as they're walking out the door, they're grabbing a 4-pack and taking our beers with them. So I think wholesaling has definitely helped us, and I think going forward in the future it will, and that's why we want to start getting it out into some stores.
That's so great, Mike.
Unfortunately, I don't think we will be putting them in any stores in Waseca for now.
Well, you want people in the area to come to you.
Yep. Not that I don't want to sell it in Waseca, but that's the other reason we've never really worked on wholesaling for any of the bars or restaurants here in town, right? I want you guys to come out, experience the brewery out at our place rather than being able to just get it at one of the places here in town. So,
well, of course. Why would you want someone to go to, let's say, Refinery 507 to get Half Pint? You want them to come out to Half Pint.
I want them to come see us. So, yes. So the liquor stores probably won't be ones here in town. I know we've talked to one in Mankato, the Hy-Vee in New Prague. Those will probably be the first 2 that we start with our cans and see how it goes. Yeah. I think the biggest failure in breweries is that people go too big too fast and spend money to get all these giant tanks, and they're just going to sell as much beer as they can, and they don't end up selling as much beer, and now they can't pay their bills, and then they end up going out of business. So my philosophy has always been start small, slowly grow, and see where it goes. And we have a great group of owners. that all feel the same way. We just wanted to create a small business here in Waseca that hopefully would grow in the future, and we slowly are.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's been so fun to see your business grow and just see more people come to it.
Yep. And I finally feel like in the last year that we're seeing that growth. I mean, we had 2 crappy years, right? Where we were closed for a year and a half, right? We were selling beer, but you couldn't come out to the tap room, and it had to be to go. And, I think even after COVID, it took people a while to get back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
And
it did.
And now, I should have built a bigger tap room. Because that's what we're finding lately is, and that's what I always feel bad about is when people come out to the brewery and there's no seats in there. Because we're at winter, right? We've now taken away the outside seating.
Absolutely.
And we did bring recently we brought a couple of the outdoor tables inside to get some more seats inside. But a lot of Fridays and Saturdays, we still have people standing to drink their beer because there's no seats in the tap room.
You might have to get some of those igloos, Mike.
And we thought about that, but we are what we are, right?
Yes.
And I hate to see somebody come out, and we will always do what we can to find seats, and as people are leaving, get people seated, and people might stand there for a few minutes with a beer until we can get a seat, and that's not every weekend, but
right.
A lot of those weekends we only have like 70 seats in the brewery, and they're all full.
You got to come out early, right after work on Friday.
Yep, 4 o'clock. You can always get a table at 4.
Absolutely.
It's that 6 o'clock.
That's trickier.
Yeah.
I do like when I go out there and there's so many people that I have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
Never seen them before in my life. And that tells me that people are coming from out of town.
They are.
To come to your business.
Those people that have and it's not just the hot passport. There's just a lot of people that drink craft beer and want to try as many breweries as they can. I hear that all the time from people. I've been to 170 Minnesota breweries, right? Or whatever their number is, that they want to try to visit all these breweries. And we're unique, right? We're out in the country. A lot of our Google reviews talk about how they totally thought they were lost and driving down this gravel road. There's no way there's a brewery out here, and sure enough,
And then here it is.
Yep, and then we're out there in the middle of nowhere. So,
now you were involved in Waseca. You didn't just move here and open a business. You immersed yourself in the community. You volunteer with your kids' sports, and you do a lot of things. Talk about what it's meant to be part of Waseca, not just move here, but part of
as much as I can, right?
Yeah, because I know that you are very busy brewing, but you also make time for other things.
And sports for my boys was always a big thing, right? I grew up playing football, baseball, basketball. So when my boys started getting involved in their sports, I was going to be at their practice anyway, so I might as well help coach. So I've been blessed that I get to be with my boys to do those things. Of course, they're getting older now, so basketball is done for me. So I coach basketball.
Okay.
I did that for, 4 or 5 years with my boys, as an assistant coach helping out and stuff. And then this year, I did football for a couple years with my youngest son, but my boys are soccer players. So
nice.
then I had to learn soccer because I knew football, but I didn't know anything about soccer. And I ended up helping, JV and varsity this year with the school soccer. So you only have that certain amount of time with your kids. So that's why I chose to do those things with my boys while I could. So.
What else do they do? They play soccer, and
soccer is the main sport right now. They were doing basketball, but both of them decided this year wasn't. They were kind of just done with basketball. Yep. So it's always been their choice what they want to do. So we'll have a few more years of soccer, and then Lucas he'll be a senior next year.
Oh my gosh!
Then we got to start looking at colleges and stuff like that. So.
Oh man!
So my winter has definitely freed up with time because there's no basketball this year.
There's no basketball this year. Holy cow!
But I'm sure I'll end up helping with soccer, and I took over last year being the field supervisor for the soccer club, so I paint all the fields and
that's really
do
cool.
all that stuff too. So.
Do your boys have any interest in brewing?
I don't think so.
No?
No, which is fine with me.
Yeah.
Lucas is very engineering oriented.
Okay.
So I think that's where he's going. And
Maybe he can engineer some more tables in the brewery.
yeah, Nolan, I have
Some
no
more
idea.
space.
That kid, he loves cooking and origami, and he's very artistic. So I'm very interested to see where he goes with what he wants to do. So
Sound like you got two well-rounded boys at home.
yep, they're pretty good kids.
That's awesome. Well, I really do appreciate what you've brought to Waseca County and the Waseca business community and the Waseca tourism. I mean, that's what you brought is huge.
Well, and that's what we wanted to do, right? I mean, we felt like Waseca was a great place to start a brewery because we were surrounded by enough bigger cities that we could pull from all those places, which we do. Mankato, Albert Lee, we're Owatonna, Faribault.
Absolutely.
We're just surrounded by, and we get people from all those places. A lot of our regulars are people from other cities that come over as much as they can. So, we're doing what we wanted to do at the brewery and bringing people to Waseca. So
I love it. And I love that you brought your whole family here. Not just your kids, obviously, but your brother, your mom and dad, everyone came to Waseca.
We've tried to talk Amy's family into it, but that's not going to happen.
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah.
Your business is quite the asset to the area, and both you and Amy are an asset to Waseca.
Thank you.
So thank you for being here. The last question we ask is, when you were 17, before kids, before career, before reality, what did you think you were going to do, Mike? What was your life
at
goal?
17?
At 17, what did you think?
I was going to be an architect.
Okay.
That's what I was going to be.
You were going to be an architect.
Yep, that's what I wanted to be when I was younger.
Okay, and what happened?
I went to Oregon State after high school, and I found that architecture wasn't what I wanted to do. So I jumped around between graphic design and business, and I didn't end up getting my college degree because I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Sure.
And college isn't right for everybody, right?
No.
And it took me a long time to figure it out. I worked as a manager at grocery stores. I did grocery stores for 12 years, and then I worked for Comcast Cable. And those were just jobs, right?
Yeah.
I enjoyed those jobs, but I get to do what I love to do now, so.
I love it. Well, you know what? You're designing some pretty damn good beers for everybody.
you.
So I think you're an architect of sorts.
Yes, kind of, right?
Yes, you
Designing
are.
stuff, yes.
So you made it, Mike. You
Yep.
made it. Well, thank you so much for being here, Mike. This was so awesome.
Thanks,
I
Ann.
learned a lot, actually.
Thanks.
This was cool. Thank you. Thank you so much to our sponsors, Bird's Eye Foods and Itron. Without them, we certainly could not tell the big stories of our small town. And thank you so much to our production team, Small Town Media and Production. Join us next time for another episode of Waseca Small Town Big Stories.